So it's early morning and I already have a comment on my video, Homeownership, the Lost American Dream. And I think this is worth reading because my response, I think, it's kind of important. Like there's a bit of topic here. So doing a little bit of a follow up to my own video. John SG8 says, when the average household income in the U.S. is 100,000, which it is not. That is not the average household income, but imagine it is. Buying a $500,000 house is a normal thing. So just be clear, that is not normal. A $100,000 household income cannot afford a $500,000 house. That is in no way a good financial move. That would be someone, first of all, no bank should be allowed to give you a loan at that rate for that, because that is a life crippling amount. Now, I'm personally of the feeling that they should give out any loans that they want and that it is up to people taking out a loan to be able to pay it back. I don't think the government should oversee those things, but that is not the American system. America is government overseeing of your life. That is the American process, and they provide a lot of consumer protection. So in that, one of the things is protecting people from making bad financial decisions, and this is one of them. The government should not allow people, if you're going to have that kind of system, they shouldn't allow people making $100,000 as a household income to buy a $500,000 house. That is a crazy number. I certainly know people who have made 100,000. They certainly could never have survived had they got taken out a loan for a $500,000 house. Now, if they save up over time, of course they should be allowed, right? We're assuming someone getting minimum down payment and trying to make those payments based on that. He said, to be honest, two college-educated people in the New York metro area are probably making more like 150 plus. Well, that's probably true. In the New York metro, they also couldn't get a house for 500,000. Like, where are you going to find that? The purchasing decision also gets pushed because the cost to rent and own are almost identical. That in no way is true. The only difference is the down payment, which is both not true and also very misleading, simply because people miss how down payment can be used. We're going to talk about that. Now, this only makes sense if you live in an area for longer than 3 years or so. Definitely, you have to have a minimum of 3 years. Realistically, you don't want to be buying a house unless you're going to stay much longer than that, or you're banking on the house going up in value, which of course people will always tell you when they're trying to sell you a house. And then many people who buy houses, half of them lose money instead of gaining money. It does not do what people think it does. So he says, so are you suggesting that people in the U.S. should be in more multi-generational homes? So there's two ways to look at this, right? There's what I'm willing to recommend to a person I care about, like my audience, you guys, and there's what I would like to see happen, right? So as an American, because I'm American, what I want to see as a society is exactly what's happening. America does the best thing for me, right? For people who are smart and willing to forego social norms and are not forced to conform to what society wants, what parents want, to what schools want, to what the government wants, America works really well. For people who are going to listen to the government, listen to big business, listen to marketing, listen to teachers, to listen to what parents are pressured to tell their kids, then it is terrible. So it depends on who you are. As a society, we do not want multi-generational homes. That doesn't help the system. That helps the people who are in the multi-generational home. As a society, we don't want people taking out good loans, and we don't want people able to easily repay loans, and we don't want people buying affordable houses. As a society, we want people completely strapped with debt. We want people with houses they cannot possibly afford or get out of, because it keeps them from using that money to buy things they want, and instead forces them to pay into the system, right? Benefiting investors and banks, benefiting the government, benefiting the tax base. We want people making bad decisions, right? The same reason that the government pushes people so heavily towards going to university, even though all the math says that on average this makes no sense, even though everybody knows and everyone talks about it, yet people don't stop going to university, right? Because the social pressure is enough, the marketing is enough, that people will make incredibly bad financial decisions about their own lives without a blink, and they'll argue with you about how they should make these bad financial decisions. And it shows just how bad our education system is, that people are able to make and sustain these incredibly illogical arguments and make the biggest life decisions that there are, right? What are the biggest life decisions you will make? What country you live in, who you're going to marry, or if you're going to marry, what house you're going to buy, and bigger probably than any of those, because it's so irreversible, is Do you or do you not go to university? Because that, of all those decisions, is the one that gives up years of your life that you can never reclaim. Move to the wrong country, you can always move back. Buy a house, you can always sell it. Get married, you can always get divorced. There's a lot of things that can be reversed, but giving up 4 to 8 years of your life on an education that may actually hold you back is an unbelievable level of decision that people take with very little regard all the time. And as a society, what we want is people making bad decisions. We don't want to make bad decisions. We want other people to make bad decisions. So as an American, as just an American who wants the best thing for America, I want exactly what they're doing. All these terrible things that cripple people who voluntarily make these decisions helps everyone else. It makes the banks more profitable, which pays the shareholders. And who are the shareholders of the banks, right? Millions and millions of Americans own tiny pieces of all those banks. I invest in index funds. That means every major bank in America, I'm one of the investors. So all those people making bad decisions, now it doesn't make me very much money, but I make another penny or two compared to what I would make if every individual didn't make those decisions. Those things, and then who do the banks give their money to, right? Well, they have to hire contractors and they have to do these things. And who's in houses? People who can't move and take jobs other places, right? Who's in houses? People who are stuck paying American taxes. I moved to Nicaragua. I'm no longer encumbered by many of those taxes. Some, yes, but not as many. I'm not encumbered by the cost of the housing market. I'm not encumbered by all those decisions that people are making. They're essentially, especially in America, where big business is part of the government, where they're very, very intertwined, and paying into big businesses like banks is often very similar to paying taxes in many, many ways. In a system like that, the most beneficial thing is to have everyone else make bad decisions and you make good decisions. So if the question is, what is a smart thing to do for the average person? For the average person, it is very sensible to not go to university because it is a very rare job that actually benefits from going to university. That does not mean spending the same amount of time being drunk and not that's a whole different discussion. But making wise decisions about your education, that's a smart thing to do. Staying with multi-generational housing when that's available to you, when it makes sense, when you can have a job, when you can pursue your career, pursue your life dreams, pursue your investments, whatever it is you want to do. Use that to save money, build a career while saving money, right? Not all families will do that, but that's one of the ways in which the system punishes at a bigger level, right? It doesn't make it easy for an individual to step out of the system because it requires both children who are able to say, I'm going to put up with the social pressure and the ridicule of being 19, 20, 21 and still living at home. I'm going to put up with the social disapproval of learning a skill and getting a job and not going to university. Some people need to go to university. It's not universally bad. Buying a house isn't universally bad. These are just decisions that, on average, people make the wrong decision. The knee-jerk conservative reaction is to do the most reckless thing, much like investing, right? Almost all investing people get backwards. People refer to bonds as conservative, but it's the most reckless, normal way you can invest. And people refer to stocks as risky, even though they're the most conservative and safe way you can invest. So clearly people are getting these concepts backwards. They don't look at the math. They don't look at the history. They don't look at the logic. They look at the sales pitches. And that provides a lot of really bad information, a lot of bad approaches. So as an individual, you want to make all these decisions very carefully. You want to use math and logic to do so. You want to actually approach them as major life decisions that require real evaluation. Do that. And on average, you want to make these decisions. But in the case of like university, an 18-year-old can make that decision on their own. And I know that a lot of 18-year-olds are like, well, my parents won't let me. Your parents don't have a say in the matter. If you are giving your parents a say in the matter, that is another decision of yours. It is not their decision. They don't have that power. Now you say, well, they're not going to let me live at home if I don't go to university. Okay, so that's where we get into this next problem, right? And that is because of these social pressures, it is very common for parents in America and other places to not allow children to stay at home. Maybe they'll let them stay a little bit, but there's always this, maybe it's time you move on. Maybe it's, right? And having that need to get rid of your children, right? Takes away the multi-generational option from them. And that's where you don't need to teach children how to make good decisions, right? That's relatively easy. If you get children and go, look, here's how your life will play out. Why would you do these bad things? And they will very often say, why did no one tell me about all this information and logic and math that's available? I don't even know to look for it. I've been told so much to just ignore logic and ignore decision making and just do what adults tell me to do. But once they're 18, right? When you're 17, adults are required to give you good advice. The moment you turn 18, they're allowed to mislead you all they want because you're an adult like everyone else. It's an instant. One day they're supposed to look out for you, and the next day you're thrown to the fishes, and they are predatory, right? The people who raised you, not necessarily your parents, but teachers and such, their job is partially to make sure you become part of the system that is consumed for the good of the people who don't listen to them, right? They have to go through university and be taught to do that and pressured to do that and all these things to make sure you fall into a system where your life's work will be essentially donated to the people who aren't doing that, donated to society. So that's where the multi-generational thing is difficult. It's easier, much easier to convince parents, well, your children are not successful unless they move out. They'll never learn what they need to know to live on their own if they don't move out, right? Don't take care of your kids. Don't coddle your adult children. Don't allow them to ease into adulthood. Don't give them the economic advantages that are at your disposal. And of course, some families can't do it. They don't have the space. They don't have the money. They don't have the whatever. Not everyone can, but a lot of people can. If you have a 17-year-old, if you have an 18-year-old high school student who's still living with you, and then they graduate high school, your house does not magically stop having a place for them to live, right? Wherever they've been still exists. So it's very rare, but it does exist. Situations where multi-generational living isn't a possibility. Now, I get that adult children and adults living in the same house tend to get on each other's nerves a lot because that adult and child relationship has shifted. And that makes things really difficult. But American society pushes that rift to encourage home ownership, to encourage this loss of economic power to the people who are unable to make those changes. And of course, it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it because in case people aren't drawing the obvious conclusions, the people who are most likely to be controlled by these social mechanisms, the ones who feel the most peer pressure, the ones who feel the most shame, the ones who feel they have to put on a show of being more financially capable, those who are less able to walk into the country club and say, I still live with my parents, I'm 21, and I'm not going to university, and I'm using this time to start my own business and learn about what it's like to be an entrepreneur. If you do that, and you're a minority, and you're poor, and you get to a point where you can walk into a club and say those things, people will be like, ugh, and you know it's true. Not all people, but a lot of people are going to be like, poverty, don't know what they're doing, minorities. But if you do that as a white, affluent, long-term citizen of the country, you walk in and it's much, much easier to make this, I have the ability to be multi-generational. I have the ability to live on my own. I have the ability to go to university. I have the ability not to go to university. I am making choices. It is far easier from a social perspective to make the argument when you're affluent and white than if you're a minority and or poor. In any of those cases, everyone who's in those struggling classes, whether it's financial or racial or citizen-based, right? It's more complex than that, but it keeps a stratification of society in place because those social structures are most effective towards those who are most hurt by them. That's where the system is bad. If it was purely those who care do better and those who don't care do worse, then it would not be such a big deal. But because it tends to apply far more strongly in minority communities and in poverty-stricken areas, they are far less able to break through the social constraints of society. That's where it becomes an ethical issue. If it wasn't for that, there'd be no ethics issue to it whatsoever. It's like the lotto, right? Do I like the lotto? I love the lotto. It's a voluntary tax system. Here's a system where people who want to throw their money away, it's so basic. Everybody knows. Nobody can make the claim that they don't understand the math, that they think the lotto actually can make them money, that it's a good investment. No one can make that argument. There is no person who actually believes that. They'll say it, of course. People lie all the time, but no one actually believes it. They know that playing the lotto is throwing their money away and that the chances that they will win is so minuscule that it would never make sense, right? But I love the lotto because it lets people who want to donate their money to the system to do so. That's fantastic. No one's pressured to do it. No one's lied to about it. Nobody it has to do it. It's not cool. It's not fun. It's not entertaining. It's boring. It's costly. And it's honestly kind of embarrassing. And people who play it may be like, the lotto's fun. And it's fine. If that's a form of entertainment, you're like, whatever. Doesn't matter. But you can't go around and brag about playing the lotto. I scratched 20 tickets today. That's not a cool thing to say. No one's like, oh man, what a great life you have. That is not how it works, right? The lotto isn't seen as cool. It isn't seen as special, and it isn't seen as beneficial. So the lotto is great because, yes, sometimes people want to donate to the system, and it does it on a small scale. But for all the people who are voluntarily buying houses that shouldn't, getting locked in, and as someone who has potential career aspirations, that I'm mobile and can move and take a job that tons of my competitors cannot because they bought a house and shouldn't have, is super beneficial to me as well, right? So now I'm older. It doesn't matter anymore. But when I was younger and my mobility in my career was a huge factor in moving up and getting to the upper echelons of my career field, whereas so many people, once they say things like, well, I bought a house, this is the community I'm growing up in, that's fine. If that's your priority, great. But you have to be aware that you're prioritizing that over your career, over your income, over your financial stability, over your options, over your life stability, right? And it's perceived that owning a house makes you more stable, but owning a house makes you less stable. It makes you more financially precarious, both from a career perspective, from an investment perspective, all those things play in. So if the question is, what do I recommend? As a society, I recommend we stay the course. We are doing a horrible job at helping individuals, but a great job at helping those who actually care. But on an individual basis, I must give you ethical advice. And that advice is to reconsider buying a house in general. This is for America, right? But if you're coming to Nicaragua, same logic applies. Don't let social pressures make you buy a house that makes no sense for you or for your life or for your plans. And if you are going to buy a house, make sure you make a really good, solid decision about it. Don't do so recklessly or rapidly. Think it through. Make sure you know that you're getting a good deal. Make sure it's the house for you. Make sure it plays into what you're really confident are going to be your long-term plans, especially in Nicaragua. Even though the cost of a house may be tiny compared to the cost of a house in America, your ability to sell that house is also tiny compared to your chances of selling that house in America. In America, you may buy a house for $1 million. And if you need to sell it, chances are you're going to be able to sell it. Maybe you're not going to make money. Maybe you'll even lose a little bit. But if you're willing to take $950,000 for that house you spent $1 million on, there's a really good chance you're going to be able to sell it, unless it's really not worth that at all, right? But as long as you're buying at market for that time, you can generally take a small loss and get out of a house. It's not always true. I am someone who has spent a decade trying to unload a house, even at massive losses. I figure I lost $500,000 on a house that was never $500,000 to start with, simply because of how terrible the market was for a really long time. I am passionate about not screwing yourselves over with a house to a completely different degree, because the level to which I have been screwed over by owning a house in my lifetime has been extreme, even though we thought we were making really, really conservative decisions, waiting until after the market had collapsed, knowing that my job was incredibly stable. All those things, every single one of them fell apart. Every single one. And that happens to so many people that we know. It's just how things are. Life is unpredictable. And buying a house depends on predictability to do what it does. So even if you're coming to Nicaragua, maybe your amount of financial commitment is lower, but the ability to get that liquid again is also far lower. So my recommendations to individuals are all those things, whether it's university, house, multi-generational housing. Actually stop and think, why do I feel the need to move out from my parents' house? Why do I feel the need to buy a house that I maybe can't afford? Why do I feel the need to buy a house at all? Does that even make sense? And it's similar to the why do people want to start a business? I often ask why? And the whys are often given. And if I took the why without being told you wanted to buy a house, you wanted to invest, the answer that I would say is, okay, well, definitely based on your goals, you don't want to buy a house. You certainly don't want to start a business or in the way that you're doing it. But they use those things as reasons for doing exactly the opposite to their goals. So starting at those goals and really knowing that, and then saying, how do I best actually address those goals based on math and logic and not on emotions and social pressure? then that is the best thing for you. Certainly for many people, owning a home will make sense, but not nearly as many as who will actually buy houses. And doing so, even for those who should buy a house, which is a lot of people, it should be done more slowly, more cautiously, with more research, more time, and more hands-on. So putting all those things together, it's difficult because what's good for society is not good for the individuals. But you, as my viewers, do not represent society. You are not 330 million people. You are a few thousand people. Well, technically, we're hitting about 200,000 people every 3 months. So you represent a noticeable number of people. Over the course of a year, as many as 500,000 people will be watching this channel. Thank you so much for joining me on this channel and this journey. That's amazing. But for you, you do not represent society. You just represent individuals. And I can give you this advice. I can give you this outlook that you have an opportunity, whether you're the adult who can push your children to do things that are better for them long term, or you're the child and you can go talk to your parents and say, I think this is something we should do. And remember, so we're going to touch on this real quickly. If you live with your parents, multi-generational housing, that gives you an opportunity to save money on a down payment for your next house. You could be one of those people who's buying a house with cash or moving overseas with cash instead of putting all your money into rent or mortgage. The other thing is when you do a down payment, right? And typically people are talking big down payments, 10 or 20%. If you can get into a really good position, you can often do 1 or 2%. People don't want to tell you that. But let's say you're putting down 10% on a $500,000 house. $50,000 going into the bank when you are at the age where you're trying to buy that house has the potential to gain so much interest over the time period that you would be paying for that house. That's the thing that people often overlook. They completely ignore what you could do with that down payment money if it was not going into a house. You can't treat it as if you're just going to go spend it on beer and it's all going to disappear and you don't actually have that money. If you're at that moment where you're looking at a $500,000 house and you're saying, okay, so the rent and the mortgage are about the same number. That doesn't mean they're equal. It just means they're the same number. And you have $50,000. And in one case, you're going to put $50,000 on the house. In one case, you're not. The not case, that $50,000 needs to be evaluated as if it went into something like an index fund, an S&P 500 index fund. People always ask where. Look at Vanguard. They're very simple. It may not be the one you want, but it's a very well-known one. If you put $50,000 into Vanguard at that moment and then pay rent someplace instead of paying mortgage on a house, yeah, there's some benefits to owning a house. You can customize and stuff, but you also got to pay all these other things. Like you have to pay for repairs, you got to pay for taxes, all that stuff. But if you put that $50,000 into a index fund, it's going to make on average about 9% per year every year. And while that 30 years of mortgage, that's roughly the same as rent. And some people will say, well, rent will go up over that time. Yeah, but rent is normally lower to start with. Like it's not equal. Yes, there's some negatives. It's not 100% win. Nothing is a clear win. You have to evaluate your personal needs. But that money for that down payment will grow and double roughly every 10 years. So after the first 10 years of that 30-year mortgage, it's worth $100,000. After the second 10 years, it's worth $200,000. At the end of the 30 years, it's $400,000. And at $400,000 sitting in the bank, at that point, if you were to say, well, I could buy a house, or you would, in one case you would own a house, in the other case you're still renting. Great, understood. The people who own a house now don't have to make those mortgage payments. But guess what? Their maintenance costs are way higher, and they're still paying taxes. And those numbers keep going up over time. Now, they've saved a lot of money because they don't have to pay the mortgage anymore, but you're still renting. And of course, your rent is much higher than when you started. But you have $400,000 in the bank that if you're making enough money, you can just leave there to make you completely good to retirement. But if you need to use that money, that $400,000 could be generating an incredible amount of dividends that you can use every year to live off of. You could even potentially retire right then. Maybe you can even make your rent payment based on the interest that came out of that initial down payment that you didn't have to make. That is the number that people overlook. They ignore how powerful that down payment could be if it wasn't being used to leverage into a loan. So instead of paying interest over 30 years, you could be paid interest over 30 years. And in reality, generally your rents are far lower earlier on and then higher at the end. And that's one of the things people use as a scare tactic to make mortgages sound good. Well, but your mortgage is going to be a flat rate. So over time, as inflation goes up, your mortgage is going to get cheaper and cheaper for you. That's true, but it's also misleading because it's front loading the cost. If you were to pay less in rent, but take the difference to what you would have paid monthly in the mortgage and add that to your down payment investment over time, it would dramatically increase the size of that investment. And you have to do those numbers too if you're going to compare numbers like that, because that's how you use that money in a smarter way. Or even smarter than that, you could start a business that may make far more than 9%. There's a lot of things you could do with that money in a different way. And if you need to, at some point, you can use that to buy a house in cash and not have to pay interest all those years on that money. There's a lot of ways that you can leverage that same decision. But it is often said that rents and mortgages are very close in price, and that is not generally the case. There are times that they become, it's very difficult to evaluate, but they can come close to parity at times. It's very rare, and right now it's certainly not one of those times. Rents are cheaper than mortgages, and it's never just the mortgage. It's the mortgage, the tax, the maintenance, the upkeep, all those things in a house remain quite a bit higher than rents today in the United States, in almost all markets. On average, you're going to benefit right now from renting. I understand over time that they shift, and so that's why we talk about the time value of money and those kinds of things. We're getting into a really deep financial discussion at that point. But when you're looking at those factors, right, when people say rents are almost as much as mortgages, that is simply untrue. In the majority of cases, you can find a rent that's close to a mortgage, but it is rare. You also have, and this is a little bit social, so this is a little bit cheating. But generally, when you rent what you need. When you buy for what you will need, right? So people who are buying a house typically are like, well, right now we need 1 bedroom, maybe 2 because I want a home office, but we're thinking about having kids someday, so we're going to get a 3 or 4 bedroom before you have those kids. But renting, you say, well, I need a bedroom and a home office, so I'm going to rent 2 bedrooms. So your rent is generally much cheaper. And so that's kind of a false comparison because you're not renting the same thing that you would buy. But you don't need to rent the same thing that you would buy. So you have that ability to only rent as needed. And as your capacity needs change over the years, you would still do so fairly slowly. You know, you add a child, you add a bedroom. You have another child, you add another bedroom, right? And yes, that could require moving. So many people have such a disdain for moving, even though it's years apart, that they often make massive financial decisions to avoid a weekend of hiring some movers. It's a very strange decision, but these are emotional things that people are taught to let play in. And you would not believe how often you can make really good life determining decisions and then have someone go, I don't want to ever have to move. I'm willing to lose $250,000 to not have to hire movers for 1 weekend 10 years from now. That is some crazy financial decision. If you set it in reverse, would you, if you knew you were going to be charged $2,000 in 10 years to be moved to a place that's better for you, would you voluntarily pay $250,000 right then and there? You have to save up starting now. You're going to pay $250,000 for the luxury of staying in that house. People would go, never? What are you talking about? That's insane. But if you say it in reverse, people will happily commit to spending $250,000 in order to avoid that in so many cases. It's absolutely crazy the way that people are emotionally tied to major financial decisions. And that's really dangerous and reckless. And that's the thing that if we're trying to help my 200,000 viewers, we want you to make good decisions. Let other people make bad decisions. And the more they make bad decisions, the more other people buy houses that they can't afford, the more they take out loans, the more they go to university for a field that doesn't reward that, for all these bad decision making, for the non-multi-generational houses, all of them increase the inflation rate. All of them increase the cost of houses. All of them increase all these things to your benefit. You're the winner if you're the one who steps outside that system. If you use multi-generational houses, if you sometimes skip university, but study something else instead, build a career instead, be an entrepreneur instead. If you invest your money instead of making it a down payment on a house. By the way, you would start investing that money before it became a down payment. You should do that when it's the down payment too. As you're saving up your $50,000 down payment, it should be an investment earning some interest along that path, regardless of whether or not. But people who are saving for a house rarely do that, and people who are just making an investment generally start the investment process right away. That's purely trend, so you can't use that in the math. But just the thing, when you're thinking of it, always any savings you're doing, make sure it's always kept in an investment. All of these mechanisms, if you're the one who avoids the social constructs, you can be the winner in all this. So that is what I want, right? So it's not about what everyone should do. It's about what you should do. And we as a team here in our community can benefit. And is it sad that other people are voluntarily giving us those advantages? No, not really. It's voluntary, right? It's just like the lotto. If your kids get to go to high school for cheaper because someone voluntarily put all their life savings into the lotto because they thought it was fun, great that you benefited from something they voluntarily thought they would use, right? That's how the system works. So all these people who feel that the social constructs are more important to them than the financial stability or the lifetime mobility or the security or the wealth that they could have, good, right? They're getting what they want out of the system. You can get what you want out of the system. Thanks for joining me. Sorry for the really long follow-up, but it was an interesting question. And the whole, like, what should we do is very different than understanding the system. And there are, depending on who you are, what you should do varies. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. I'll see all of you tomorrow.